the photograph stopped me cold. I was scrolling through an online auction archive, looking at old Coney Island ephemera, postcards, ticket stubs, the usual nostalgia. And then, there it was. A glass box. Inside the glass box, a baby. Tiny, shriveled, barely 2 pounds. Behind the glass box, a sign in block letters that read, "Living babies in incubators." And behind the sign, visible through the open doorway, the wooden scaffolding of a roller coaster. The image was from 1903. The baby was real. The roller coaster was the one at Luna Park, and the exhibit was sandwiched between a sword swallower and something called Lionel the Lion-Faced Man. That photograph led me into one of the strangest chapters in American history. For 47 years, from 1896 to 1943, premature infants were collected from hospitals across the country and placed in glass incubators on display at world's fairs, amusement parks, and boardwalk sideshows. Visitors paid 25 cents to look at them. The man running the operation called himself a doctor. He wasn't. He claimed degrees from universities in Leipzig and Berlin. No records confirm this. He changed his name at least twice. He fabricated virtually every detail of his professional biography. And over the course of 4 decades, he says he saved 6,500 babies that the medical establishment had left to die. His name, or at least the name he chose for himself, was Dr. Martin Arthur Cooney. He was born Michael Cohn in 1869 in Krotosyn, a town in what was then Prussian Poland. He arrived in America as a teenager. The 1910 census lists his occupation not as physician but as a dealer in surgical instruments. He claimed to have studied under Dr. Pierre Constant Boudin, the French obstetrician considered the founder of modern neonatal medicine. But the timeline does not work. Cooney appears to have immigrated to the United States by 1888 when he was 19. Too young to have completed the medical training he described, too young to have been Boudin's protégé. And yet, for reasons that still are not fully understood, this man with no verified credentials became the only person in America consistently saving premature babies. Not in a hospital, not in a research facility, in a tent at Coney Island, right next to the freak show. Here is what makes this story impossible to dismiss as a simple curiosity. In the early 1900s, American hospitals did not treat premature babies. I need you to sit with that for a moment. They did not try. Premature infants were classified as weaklings, a medical term used without irony. The prevailing view, published in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal in 1901, was that it might not even be worthwhile to save them. 3 out of 4 premature babies died, and the medical establishment was fine with that. As late as 1939, a typical New York hospital might have 1 single incubator. 1. Cooney had dozens, staffed around the clock by 5 wet nurses and more than 15 trained medical technicians who lived on site. His survival rate was 85%. He never charged the parents a dime. Every cent came from the 25-cent admission tickets of people who wandered in off the boardwalk after eating a hot dog. Now I know the obvious objection. This sounds like exploitation. Babies on display for profit. A fake doctor running a sideshow medical operation. And the objection is not unreasonable. The New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children tried to shut Cooney down multiple times. Medical professionals called him a quack and a baby swapper. His nurses would slide a diamond ring over a baby's entire wrist to show the crowd how impossibly small these infants were. He sometimes dressed recovering babies in oversized clothes to emphasize their fragility. This was showmanship. There is no getting around that. But here is what the objection misses. The hospitals would not do it. The technology existed. The incubators worked. And the institutions that could have saved these children chose not to. Cooney's sideshow was not competing with legitimate medicine. It was replacing medicine that refused to exist. And that refusal was not accidental. It was ideological. This is where the story turns dark. Because the same decades that Cooney was saving babies at World's Fairs, those exact same fairgrounds were hosting something else. Starting in 1908 at the Louisiana State Fair, a new kind of competition appeared. They called them Better Babies contests. Infants between 6 and 48 months old were brought in by their parents, measured, weighed, examined, and scored on physical health, mental development, and physical appearance. The judging system was borrowed directly from livestock evaluation. A 1913 article described the process plainly. A physician scores a baby in precisely the same way as a judge of experience in livestock scores cattle, horses, and hogs. By 1960, more than 47,000 babies had been rated in contests held across the majority of American states. The Woman's Home Companion magazine sponsored them nationally, created a Better Babies Bureau, and commissioned a bronze medal for the winners. One 3-year-old boy named William Charles Flynn won 14 first prizes and was publicly matched for a proposed eugenic marriage with a 17-month-old girl who had scored equally well. Newspapers ran the headline, "Mate Found for Perfect Boy." And if you are wondering whether these contests had a racial dimension, they excluded African American children entirely. The standard of perfection was white by design. But the contests were the polished surface. Underneath was something far worse. In November 1915, a Chicago surgeon named Dr. Harry Heiselden was called to examine a newborn baby at the German-American hospital. The baby, Alan Bollinger, had been born with multiple birth defects. Heiselden refused to operate. He told the parents to let the baby die. Alan Bollinger lived 5 days. 8 hours before the baby died, the Chicago Commissioner of Health examined him and later testified that the condition was treatable, that he would have operated if the baby had been his patient. It did not matter. Heiselden told the press he had let at least 6 disabled infants die. He estimated this was happening at a rate of at least 1 per day in Chicago alone. A coroner's jury of 6 physicians cleared him. Helen Keller wrote an article supporting his decision. And in 1917, Heiselden produced and starred in a propaganda film called The Black Stork, dramatizing his crusade. The newspaper advertisement read, "Kill defectives, save the nation, and see the Black Stork." That film played in theaters across America for over a decade. I keep returning to the geography of this. The same fairgrounds. The same decades. In one building, Martin Cooney is fighting to keep premature babies alive in glass incubators. In another building, judges are scoring babies like livestock for genetic fitness. Down the midway, eugenics panels explain why defective humans should be eliminated. And in theaters across the country, a film is playing that argues certain babies are better off dead. This was not a fringe position, it was the mainstream. Indiana passed the first compulsory sterilization law in 1907. By 1927, the Supreme Court upheld forced sterilization in Buck v. Bell, with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes writing the now infamous line, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." Between 1907 and 1963, the state ordered more than 64,000 compulsory sterilizations. More than 60% were performed on women. The eugenics movement was not hiding, it was winning. And the babies Cooney was saving were exactly the kind of defectives the movement wanted eliminated. Now pull the lens back further, the same decades, 1854 to 1929. While Cooney is displaying premature babies at amusement parks and eugenicists are scoring infants at state fairs, something else is happening. The orphan trains. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 200,000 to 250,000 children were loaded onto trains in East Coast cities and shipped to rural families across the Midwest. The Children's Aid Society and the New York Foundling Hospital ran the programs. Children were lined up at train stops and inspected by prospective families in scenes that witnesses compared to livestock auctions. As many as 25% of these children had living parents. The Foundling Hospital sewed numbered tags into the children's clothing for identification. Catholic and Protestant organizations ran separate trains to ensure children were placed with same-faith families. By the time the last train ran in 1929, 250,000 children had been redistributed across the country with remarkably little documentation. No comprehensive database exists. Most of these children never reconnected with their biological families. An estimated 2 million descendants are alive today, many with no idea their family tree passes through an orphan train depot. And here is where I need to be careful, because I am about to describe a pattern, and patterns can be deceiving. Maybe I am seeing connections where only coincidence exists. Maybe these are simply parallel events sharing a timeline and nothing more. But consider this. Between 1900 and the 1920s, hundreds of postcards circulated across Europe and the United States depicting babies growing in cabbage patches. Not as jokes, as birth announcements. Known in the French-speaking world as faire parts de naissance, these postcards showed infants being harvested from gardens, fished from rivers, hatched from eggs, transported by train. They were produced in multiple countries, in multiple languages, by anonymous studios. Salvador Dali collected them, André Breton collected them. The genre was so prolific that scholars still cannot account for the sheer volume. Some of the postcards, when translated, reference repopulation, relocation, the selling of babies, and they cluster in the exact same decades as the incubator exhibits, the orphan trains, the eugenics contests, and the mass sterilization programs. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe there is no connective tissue between a carnival showman saving babies in glass boxes, a medical establishment deciding which infants deserve to live, a system shipping 200,000 children across the country by rail, and hundreds of anonymous cards depicting babies as agricultural products. Maybe these are all independent phenomena that happen to share a timeline, a geography, and an institutional infrastructure. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. On May the 27th, 1911, a fire broke out at Coney Island's Dreamland Park. The blaze started at the Hellgate ride during last-minute repairs before opening day. Within 20 minutes, 10 acres of buildings were engulfed. More than 80 animals perished. A lion named Black Prince escaped, was chased up an incline track, and was shot by police as thousands watched from below. And inside the incubator building, smoke poured through the doorway towards 6 premature babies. Dr. Fischel and the nurses rushed in, wrapped each baby in blankets, and carried them into the street. According to one account, Coney Island's human marvels, the sideshow performers that society labeled freaks, helped rescue the infants. Early newspaper reports said the incubator babies had died. The papers later corrected this. All 6 survived. But the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children seized on the incident to demand that premature infant care only be conducted in hospitals. The problem with their demands should be obvious by now. The hospitals still would not do it. Not for another 32 years. The people society called freaks saved the babies that the doctors refused to treat. I have thought about that sentence for weeks, and I still do not know what to do with it. Cooney kept going. He operated at Luna Park until 1943, when Cornell Hospital in New York finally opened the first dedicated premature infant station in the country. They used his methods, they used his technology, they did not credit him. He had tried to donate his incubators to the city of New York in 1940. The city refused the donation. His last major exhibit, at the 1939 New York World's Fair, was a financial disaster. The exhibit cost a fortune to build and attendance had declined. Premature babies in incubators were no longer novel enough to draw a crowd. He went broke. He died on March 1, 1950, in Coney Island, penniless and largely forgotten. He was approximately 80 years old. His wife had predeceased him by 14 years. His daughter Hildegard, born 6 weeks premature in 1907 at just 3 pounds, had been treated in his own exhibit. She survived. She became a nurse. She worked alongside him for years. She never had children of her own. There are no direct descendants. And that is where the official story ends. A quirky chapter in medical history. A fake doctor who saved real babies. An inspiring tale of one man against the system. Except I cannot stop looking at the system itself. A medical establishment that classified premature babies as weaklings and let them die. A eugenics movement that scored infants like cattle and lobbied to eliminate the unfit. A propaganda film urging audiences to kill defectives, save the nation. A network of trains shipping 200,000 children to strangers with numbered tags sewn into their clothes. And one unauthorized showman who saved 6,500 lives from the cracks between these institutions, funded by quarters from the same crowds who paid to see the 4-legged woman and the lion-faced man. The questions nobody asks are the ones that stay with me. Where did 8,000 premature babies come from during decades when hospitals did not even attempt to treat them? How did a man with no medical credentials operate for 40 years without a license in a system that was simultaneously sterilizing 64,000 people for being genetically unfit? Why did the institutions that had the technology to save these babies refuse to use it, while hosting competitions to breed better ones in the next building over? And what kind of civilization puts living babies in glass boxes at a carnival, not because it does not care, but because it is the only place that will? I found one more detail while researching this. In the summer of 1934, Cowney hosted a reunion at Coney Island for the babies he had treated at the Chicago World's Fair the previous year. Of the 58 infants he had cared for, 41 came back. Grown, healthy, carried in their mother's arms. Photographers were there. The New York Times covered it. And somewhere in the same newspaper that week, you could find articles about eugenics, about the fitness of the American gene pool, about which humans were worth preserving. The babies in the photographs did not know any of that, they just knew they were alive, and that a man whose real name nobody knew had decided they were worth saving when nobody else would. The buildings where he worked are gone. The incubators were scrapped, the records are incomplete. But the questions persist, and they connect to something larger than one man and his sideshow. What happened to the children nobody counted? What system decided which ones lived and which ones disappeared? And what are we still not being told about the decades when babies were currency, classified as defective or fit, shipped by train or displayed in glass, scored like livestock or left to die, depending on which building you walked into at the fair?